All right, welcome, y'all. Whether you're here live or checking in later for the replay, I put in the chat just for a reminder that you can comment with questions throughout. You can also email them to admin@ccresourcing.us. I've also put a link to our anonymous form where you can submit topics, questions, things you'd like to see me cover in upcoming AMAs like this, Ask Me Anything, or over on Substack where I'm posting about weekly. So if you need something and you have questions, don't hesitate to put it over there. I've got lots of topics in mind. I'm always searching for what y'all are asking, like on Facebook and things. If you have something really specific you'd like me to dive into, please let me know. Today, I was going to talk about live trainings. Last month, we talked about on demand trainings and everything it takes to set that system up. So I thought it made sense to talk about live trainings today. One of the questions that kind of got me started on this was someone asking if they needed a learning management system to offer live trainings, which is something that I had recommended for the on demand trainings because you've got a lot more moving parts with on demand, as far as I think anyway. You have to host the actual content, you have to have a quiz and a survey, and most folks are expecting your certificates to be pretty immediate. So it is really helpful if you have a learning management system to just do everything all in the same place. But you don't have to have one for on demand. And you certainly do not have to have one for live trainings either. When I first started, I was using a platform called Humanitix, and I will put that in the chat. This is kind of like Eventbrite or some of those other platforms where you can post your events and folks can buy tickets. But Humanitix, I think, is great because the platform is free for hosts. So you don't have to pay like a per event or per month fee or anything like that. It is free to use. And then the payment processing fees can either be paid by you as the host or by participants. And the bonus there, I think, is that any of those profits go to charities. So you can see on their website what charities they're working with and where some of those profits are going. I think that's a great alternative to some of the other larger event platforms in that it's the fees are actually going somewhere useful. This does work for online or in-person events if you're doing Humanitix or something similar. But I was thinking specifically if you're using Humanitix, they have an online option where you can connect to different meeting platforms like Zoom or Google Meet. There is a virtual hub that you can have for your attendees where you can include links and other resources that you might want to provide for your attendees. And if you're doing it in person, you can also include a seating map. You can have manual tickets, and there can also be a team access. So, if let's say the day of the event, it's kind of large, you've got lots of people who are coming in, and you have some staff to help you check folks in. You can make sure that your team has access so they can see who was registered and they can mark off attendance in there. That I think could be really, really helpful if you've got more than one person helping you to facilitate an event and everyone needs access to all the participants who had registered. I'm certain that other platforms use similar ways of both online and in year event, and using a platform like that can be a great way to do it. One of the important aspects of live trainings, though, is the requirement to confirm the attendance of the participants before a certificate can be issued. So some of the online platforms have built-in attendance tracking, meaning Zoom and Google Meet, for example, definitely have that attendance tracking option. You do want to make sure that you have whatever level of um, Like with Google Meet, if you have the basic plan, the basic business plan, it does not include attendance tracking for their Google Meet um, events that you might host. I think Zoom has it for all the plans, maybe not for like the free plan where you only get the 40-minute session, but for most of them, they've attendance tracking as long as you pay at whatever level you need to be paying. So make sure that's included before you start relying on that attendance tracking. While attendance tracking is super helpful, you also want to make sure that you can connect the person who registered with the person who actually attended. One of the ways you can do this is by having folks make sure they sign in with the email that they use to register. So in Google Meet and Zoom, they will collect a person's email address if they are signed into an account when they enter the Google Meet or the Zoom meeting. But if maybe their work email is what they use to register, but their personal Gmail just happens to be the one that they use to log into the account, you're not going to be able to necessarily match that up all the time. So, this is an important extra step that you might want to take in making sure that you can connect who signed in to the actual platform and who registered. And I can talk about some of the ways to do that. But this is, I'm speaking from being an NBCC CE provider. And one of the standards they have is to award the NBCC credits, then you have to ensure that the participant attended the live program and was present for the number of NBCC hours indicated. So if you have a certificate, it's a 1 hour CE. You need to make sure that the participant was there for that entire hour so that they can get 1 CE on their certificate. This is specifically a requirement for NBCC, and I imagine many of the other CE organizations also require something similar. It does have to be verified. The attendance has to be verified in an accurate and verifiable manner. And that's why I say you want to be able to match up who registered with who attended, who logged in, so that you can get that certificate accurately to the person. NBCC does have kind of a disclaimer in there, and I'll just read it straight out, that they reserve the exclusive authority and discretion to determine if NBCC credits have been measured accurately and to deny, reduce, increase, or otherwise alter the number of credits associated with a provider program. So if they find that someone did not attend to get however number of CEs you had put on their certificate, they could go back and kind of redo their certificate, either denying it outright, reducing the number, or whatever that looks like to make sure that it is accurate. And that's why we want to make sure that we can track the attendance so we don't have any issues later on after we've issued the certificates. We want it to be as accurate as possible. Mistakes are going to be made. Sometimes that happens, but for the most part, we're trying to make it as simple as possible so that we can verify the attendance and then verify that those CEs are appropriate. Some of the ways that I have done this for online and in person events is to use a Google form for the attendance tracking and survey. So even if I'm hosting a training on Google Meet, and Google Meet is tracking the attendance, I still use a Google form for folks when they log in, and then at the end for them to go in and complete the survey for the certificate. If you have most of your Google plans should have that Google form. You shouldn't be limited on that. So if you're looking for a free or low cost option, that's one way to do it. I know that Microsoft Office also has the ability to do forms. So if you already have a Microsoft account, then you might consider that. If you're trying to link up maybe an automatic way to issue certificates, then there is Certifium for Google Forms, and you can use that account to issue those certificates. If you're in person, and you've probably seen this, as commonly a physical sign in and sign out sheet. and evaluation form. So when you get to the event, you would have participants physically sign in on a piece of paper showing that they were there. And then when they leave, they also sign a paper showing when they left. And that's going to be a way to track in person attendance if you're not using a Google form. I would have up on the slide, it was a QR code or a shortened URL that they could use to go into the Google form from their phones, whatever device they might have. But if it's not common for folks to have devices with them, then you might consider a physical sign in and sign out sheet. You can also do the same for the evaluation form. I had another Google QR code for a Google form that folks would use at the end of the in-person events. Again, they'd use their device to pull that up, but you could have physical evaluation forms at your in-person events. So in that case, you really just want to make sure that you have enough forms printed or the option to add more copies. If you have like a checklist of things you need to bring day of, make sure that that is on your checklist, that you have a sign in, sign out sheet you can kind of make on the back of anything, right? Any blank piece of paper. But if you have an evaluation form with very specific questions and answers, then it's usually best if you have something you can print and hand out. Thinking about certificates, if you're going to go with a physical certificate that you want to hand out at the end of the conference, which I have seen that, and I think that was more common years ago, it can require extra time and effort before the participants leave to get their certificates because you are required to review their attendance, confirm that they were there. If you have multiple workshops, especially, you're confirming that they were there for each workshop for however amount of time, and confirming that they've completed those surveys. So, physical certificates that you're going to have to print them. You'll have to write their name on them, make sure that you sign them. There's a lot more that goes into creating and handing out physical certificates the day of a live event than it would be if you collected all the information and maybe emailed the certificates after the fact. So, if you needed like a Dana suggestion here, I would go with the electronic form, whether that's you collecting all the information electronically and then sending out certificates electronically, or collecting the information in person, like the sign in, sign out sheets and the surveys, and then sending the certificates later. Most folks, myself included, sometimes when that conference is over, I'm ready to go. I'm not trying to hang around for however long it would take for them to collect everything and ensure that everything's accurate and get everything written up and signed and handed out. The more people you have, the longer that's going to take. So I definitely would recommend, if you needed Dana's opinion here, to go with a more seamless virtual certificate option. That would be my opinion. When we're talking about live programs for NBCC, this would be your single program applications. So, single programs are only live events, these are not on demand events. And they can be as few as one session, or it can be over 18 sessions. So if you're thinking about multiple sessions, this could be like a conference or a summit, something that happens over the course of a day or a couple of days. Or you could do a series of topics and presentations, maybe under some sort of umbrella for that single program. So the example I think I've given before is if you wanted to do a single program on therapeutic approaches, then maybe once a month you would have one kind of session per month that would be about something around theoretical orientations or approaches. The number of sessions that you have is going to determine the cost of your application, as well as how early it's required to be submitted for review and how long it might take for it to be reviewed. And you're going to have to submit for each of those sessions a session information form and presenter information form if you have multiple presenters. Like if it's just me and I'm doing a topic on like a single program on theoretical orientations and it's just me, but I'm doing a different theory every month, that's still one session form per session. So per month, I'd have 12. Um, it's really up to you. You can do just one. So it doesn't need to be multiple sessions, but it is another way to maybe get the most out of that one application and the application cost. The thing to know about single program applications, though, is there's only one certificate that ever goes out for the entire program. So each session does not get its own certificate. The program as a whole gets a certificate, and that is issued at the end of the program. So if I was doing, again, that year long program, I would need to wait until that 12th final session was facilitated before I could start doing anything with the certificates. So maybe that's a topic for another day if you wanted to talk more about how to have multiple sessions under the same single program. But that's a really important consideration because this is a live only event. There's no demand option for single program applications. For ASEP, which is that ongoing CE provider application, there's the option to solely submit for live delivery approval. It does require that you've done 2 prior live events for continuing education. It does not have to be an NBCC CE situation, but you do have to have had 2 prior live events where you have issued certificates for CEs. Those 2 prior live events, even though they don't have to be offered for NBCC CEs, they do still have to have met the NBCC standards. And again, that might be a topic for another day if you want to talk about what is required for that application and what would those 2 prior live events be like if you didn't offer NBCC CEs. So that is another way that you would do live delivery through NBCC. And it's very similar in that you would need a session form for each session, a presenter form for each presenter, but you don't have to like cover all your sessions at one time because eventually the hope is you would be an ongoing provider. So you don't need them like pre-approved, if that makes sense. So, what are the overlap of the requirements for live events if you're submitting to NBCC? The program information form includes the program title, the presenters, the target audience, which this would always be like master's level clinicians working in mental health. For ASEP form, you do have to note the participants who had attended your prior events. What was the makeup of those? How many of those were master's level clinicians, things like that. You need to know the number of CE hours that you are going to offer for a single program or that you did offer for the prior CE programs if you're applying for an ASEP. What was the actual number of hours that was completed? You have to connect to the NBCC content areas. Those can be found in the standards. NBCC standards for CE providers, and they should look very familiar. These are all of the content areas that you likely had as a part of your coursework during your master's coursework. There needs to be content description. What is the program about? What is the information shared? And what are the program learning objectives? So for those prior CE events, if you're applying as a ASEP, then you would need to pull that content description and learning objectives that you had prior used. If you're doing it for a single program, creating these for that program. For the presenter qualification form for each person, you need their name. You need to indicate which session or sessions they'll be presenting on. You need to indicate their education and the relevant experience or training that they've received related to this topic that they are presenting or that they are authoring if this was an on demand. Also, need to know any professional licenses and certifications they have. There are 3 levels of presenters, and maybe that's a topic for another day. And so you'll need to know which category they fall under. And then this information on the presenter qualification form is essentially backing that up. Why did you choose which category they were a part of? And this is to indicate why, because of their education, their experience, things like that. You need to be able to share promotional and registration materials that will be given to participants for a single program or that were used for your prior programs if you're going for ASAP. And there's a whole list of requirements of what needs to be noted on that in that policy standards. So, registration requirements, do they need to create an account somewhere? Do they need to pay any fees? The content description objectives needs to be available where they're registering and where you're advertising. The name and qualifications of each presenter or author needs to be in there. The number of CE hours that are being offered and your contact information, which there is a very specific list of the types of contact information that you need to include for those as well. For these live programs, you need to include a program agenda. This is setting up specific time frames. So they want to know, NBCC wants to know, how are the number of CE hours determined? And for me, this made the most sense to break it down using the learning objectives and activities to create my outline. So I had my 3 learning objectives, and then next to each of those, I talked about how much time I would spend, like if it was lecturing style or if there's an interactive activity or something like that, needs to know what the objective and then what's gonna happen, and then also which presenter is gonna cover which material. So having like a table set up would probably be really helpful. For me, that's what I did was like an Excel table where I had it all broken down into the time frame, the learning objective, what we were doing, who was presenting on it, and how long we'd be there, and then also showing the total number of CEs for that. You'll need to give them a copy of your survey instrument that you're going to use. And there are certain aspects of the type of questions and like Likert scale or yes, no type questions, and then also what the questions cover. So asking about, was this information relevant? Was the presenter effective? Were the materials helpful? Things like that. You can find a list of those in the standards policy section H1 as well. So don't try to like create something from scratch. Use those guidelines that NBCC provides so that you can create questions that meet their standards and requirements. And then the certificate of completion. So you need to provide an example of this when you're applying. What's it going to look like? And it does have to have very specific information on it, which again, you can find in those standards policy section I3. So your certificate, or it can be like a letter. I've had a few trainings that I've gone to where I've received this letter style. It's not kind of that like horizontal type of certificate that maybe we're used to. It was more of a vertical piece of paper that just kind of indicated who the provider was, what I had attended, who I was, and then because they had multiple CEs organizations they were working with, it indicated which CE types were applicable for that training. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy, although there are plenty of templates out there, especially in Canva or in Google Slides. Actually, I have created certificates there too. Um, but it doesn't need to be complicated by any means. It just has to make sure that it includes the information required by NBCC and that is given to participants in a quote timely manner. I think it can be really helpful to let folks know like when to expect their certificates. For me, this is often like within 10 days of a single live event. If this was something where it was a series, then or there was a lot of people coming, then it might be like 10 days after the final event in the series, something like that, because it really does take time to go over the attendance, make sure that that's accurate, make sure that everyone submitted the survey that they needed to submit, and make sure you have the correct information for the provider on the certificate. So if you don't already, in your registration, I would definitely recommend including a question about what name needs to go on your certificate. Same with maybe your survey. You could ask what name needs to go on your certificate. Some folks need to include their license credentials at the end of their name. Sometimes their name needs to be written in a specific way to meet their state board requirements. So for me, it's important to have that question either asked on the front end during registration, or for me, I usually ask during the survey. It's like the first question: what name needs to go on your certificate? Some tips for successful live events that we know but don't always follow. Test your audio, your video, your internet connection, the facility, your technology, whatever you're using the day of. Make sure that it works. And if that means having some friends or family or a colleague or something like that, just jump on to a test Google Meet or Zoom meeting, or going to the facility and doing a trial run. Ask them what options you have for doing kind of like a trial run to go in and make sure that it's going to work, because it is heart wrenching when you get in to do something and something goes wrong, which is going to happen. Like, it's guaranteed something at some point is going to go wrong. So it's also helpful to have like a backup plan. If Google Meet isn't working, then where are you going to go? If Zoom is down, what's the backup plan? If something happens with a facility, probably that question is for them. What happens if your facility is not available? So test all those things ahead of time, come up with backup plans. This is where having someone else with you can be really helpful. For me, when I do live events on Google Meet, I will have an admin there to help make sure that folks can get in to the actual training, to the platform. There was a time where something in the background with the settings happened and nobody could get in. Nobody could get to the link. So my admin was just in the background making sure that people could get in, and had a copy of the link and was emailing people. And that way I could keep focusing on what I needed to focus on. And she was in the background taking care of all that. Having someone else help with like comments and questions. If they're there, they can tell you if you're online, like if your audio or video cuts out. If you're in a facility, ask who is your like IT go-to person, who is going to come help if something goes wrong. Ask what you need to bring. Do you need to bring? For me, I have my own clicker. So I know that often facilities will have like a computer and a mouse and a keyboard, and I can click on that. I like to move around. So I actually have my own clicker, a Bluetooth clicker that I bring with me so that I can advance through slides. So yeah, just some things to test out, especially that equipment, and just make sure that it's working before the actual day of the event. Keep your slides as concise as possible. Keep your bullet points brief. I know at one point there was like a 4 by 4 rule. I think when I was in college, it was like no more than 4 bullet points per slide, no more than 4 words per bullet point, maybe. Nowadays, I go with some more accessibility based standards. So I have the kind of minimum font size that I will use, and that will help me to determine how much I can fit onto a slide. I'm not trying to crowd it on the slide, don't get me wrong, but that kind of lets me know how much I can fit as far as number of bullet points and number of words per bullet point. I'm actually going to be writing about accommodations over on Substack next week. So if you're interested in learning more about what those font sizes are and how I try to keep my information and materials accessible, be sure to check that out over there. But maybe that's a Ask Me Anything alive that we could do in the future. If you have visuals, make sure that they are easy to understand and see. Be sure to describe them for folks maybe who aren't able to see the visuals as well. Um, just think through what your slides are looking like, because if they get really busy, then it can be hard to pay attention to what you're saying. So just keeping them as simple as possible for me has been the best thing to do. If you are able to provide materials ahead of time, I have a conference I'll be presenting at next month, and they ask for a copy of our slides and any handouts ahead of time so they can provide them to participants. And those materials are in the participant hub, so they can go in and get them. There have been times where they have offered to print things if necessary. Some presenters do bring printed versions of things. This could maybe be an accommodations type question. I'm sure I'll be writing more about that on Substack, but just kind of consider if it would be helpful for someone to have a copy of whatever you're talking about in front of them. I'm going to be doing a presentation on documentation, and I have a sample documentation template, and it's going to be in the participant hub for folks to pull up. I'll have it on my screen, but I also think if you are more like tangible and hands on, then it could be helpful to have a printed copy. So these are just some thoughts for live events that we might not otherwise consider because we're so focused on just creating our slides and whatnot. But that those materials that go along with that can be really important as well. Also consider, if you're doing live events, whether you want to open up time for questions and answers throughout, or if you're going to save them to the end. I like to multitask. I think it's helpful when y'all are giving me questions and thoughts during a training. So I'm always constantly checking the comments and the chat to see like who all is contributing, what is maybe what I was talking about brought up a question, or maybe it ties into something that I talk about later or something I've talked about before. I like that kind of back and forth throughout, and I recognize not everyone does. So maybe figure out what would be your preferred Q&A. So mine is kind of like constant, though it could be maybe just a pause at the end of each section for a short Q&A or a catch up on the chat, or just doing a Q&A at the end. And some of this might be determined by how many participants are there. So if you only have like 15, then maybe that's not too overwhelming. But if you start to have 50 or 100, it can get busy in chats and side conversations. So just kind of consider what works best for you personally as the presenter, but also what might work best for the format that you're doing and how many participants will be there. If you are presenting by yourself and you don't have an admin to help you with tasks like polling or breakout groups, make sure you know how to use those. And that can be the same for in person or online. If you're going to be setting up breakout rooms or groups in person, you also need to think through, how are people going to separate? Like, are they going to form their own groups? Do you want to kind of count it out? Where will they move to? Like, if they're kind of set up in rows, are they going to move into groups? What materials might they need? Those really big sticky notes are always a lot of fun. So just think through, if you're the one running everything, which often at the beginning of being a CE provider, we are. Honestly, we are running everything ourselves. Figure out how you want certain things to work. So again, it can be as smooth as possible the day of. You're not spending a lot of time trying to tell everyone where to go. Instead, you're already ready. You kind of knew what to expect. If you're turning a live event into an on demand product, there are definitely considerations, and NBCC actually provides very specific guidance around this. So, if your intention is to make it an on demand product, go into the live event with that in mind. Make sure that it is something that would make sense to record, that you have the ability to record it, that you have the ability to edit it later for on demand. I think in the last AMA I did about on demand, I talked some about turning lives into on demand, but it is not as simple as just recording something straight through and then turning around and posting the exact recording for an on demand product. There are considerations for that to make sure that it is meeting the standards for NBCC and meeting the standards for however many CEs you'll be issuing for that on demand product, that may be different than how many you issued for the live. That sometimes happens. So, this is everything I had. I'm not seeing any additional questions. Um, I really just wanted to talk about some considerations for live trainings since we went over on demand trainings. I think it seems simpler based on how I talked a lot less today than I did about on demand. But you have a lot more that could go wrong, so to speak, during the actual time. So on demand is like all this stuff to get it ready, pull it together, make sure that it's seamless, and then go and let it, out into the world, let participants do the on demand thing. And for the most part, as long as things are running smoothly, you won't hear too much from folks. They will keep doing the surveys, the quizzes, getting their certificates, and they'll be happy. If you have a glitch in the system, then you might hear something. But if it's live, there can be more moving parts in the moment. So the amount of prep ahead of time might be different because of the different considerations you have for what the actual live event is going to be like when you're there with those participants. So I hope that this is helpful. If you do have questions, even after the fact, if you're here for the replay, feel free to put them over in the chat. You can email them at any time. You can also leave anonymous questions or topics in the survey, which is also linked in the chat. I'll be doing this again next month. I think I'm going to talk about timing, like what timing does it take to become an NBCC CE provider? How long does it take from like beginning to being approved, maybe from beginning to offering your first training, whatever that might be. That's kind of what I'm thinking about covering. So if you have questions or concerns about that, please do send them my way so I can go ahead and start gathering them now and pulling it together for next month. I appreciate y'all being here. Appreciate you watching today. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks, y'all.